Welcome to Cycl'n Vancouver. My name is Steve. I'm a 58-year-old guy, 6'5", around 250 pounds, who enjoys violent combat sports, particularly hockey, football, and MMA, as well as lots of baked goods and cycling around the city. If you're interested in seeing what Vancouver looks like from the back of a road bike ridden by some spandex-wearing old dude, sit back and relax. This is Ride 271. Today is Thursday, August 10th, 2023. I have a mix of sun and cloud and a temperature of about 19 Celsius. There's a slight 6-kilometer wind out of the southwest. For this ride, I'm going to do something I have never done before. Long ago, when I went to college, I had a psychology professor who told us that the most studied cohort of people in society were undergraduate students. That seemed to make sense given that these studies tended to be performed at colleges and universities, and undergrad students were plentiful. And probably even more importantly, they were cheap. I spent something like 9 years at college and university, and yet I managed to avoid volunteering for any studies. That is, until today. Sometime in July, I saw an advertisement asking for cyclists to participate in some important research. When I realized that that research was being carried out at the University of British Columbia, I quickly decided I'd volunteer for it. I contacted them and we set up a date, and as you might have guessed, today is the day. So I'm gonna head over to UBC, though I am not gonna take the direct route. Instead, I'll head south on Cypress to 45th Avenue and then head west to Southwest Marine Drive before turning north to the university. Here is my Strava route map for this ride. When I was in college, one of the more interesting experiments we learned about was the Milgram experiment. In that study, Stanley Milgram recruited volunteer students from Yale to help with examining teaching techniques. As told to the volunteers, a learner would be asked questions, and upon each incorrect response, the volunteer would be instructed to administer an electric shock punishment to the learner. The punishment was progressive in that the severity of the electric shock increased with each incorrect response. That was the setup, but of course that wasn't what was actually being studied. Rather, coming fairly soon after the end of the Second World War, the volunteers were being studied to see how they would respond to directions from authority. As it turned out, a substantial percentage of the volunteers did as they were instructed and administered the punishment, even when the learner was screaming in pain and begging them not to. Some of the volunteers argued with Milgram and told him they didn't want to administer the punishment, yet under direct orders, they did as they were instructed. So why am I mentioning this? Well, besides the interesting nature of the study, it raised a question about consent by the volunteers. They were deceived, and presumably some of them had some very traumatic experiences. Studies like the Milgram experiment led to changes to the rules of consent. From then onwards, study participants had to give informed consent, meaning that it is highly unlikely that the Milgram experiment could be undertaken nowadays. So for today's study that I had volunteered to participate in, I was given very little information about it. In fact, most of the information I received came from the advertisement that I responded to, and it suggested that the researchers wanted to collect data on passing distances for cyclists on bike paths that encountered vehicles. I was sent a route map by email showing where I could meet the researchers and the path that I would cycle around. It's funny, but I actually thought the study was a complete waste of time and I considered blowing it off. But since I committed to participate, I decided I'd better show up.
here for the 2 p.m.?
I am.
So I found the researchers as instructed. They were actually quite happy since I was the first participant they had seen in hours. After fitting out my bike with a camera and some other equipment, they asked me to ride 4 laps around the marked course. I completed the consent form and started the lap. I came around after the first lap, and one researcher asked me to ride in the path to the right of the orange pylons. Since there had been pedestrians in that path, I had moved to the left side. I said I'd keep to the right, and off I went again.
So, we mentioned that the study is looking at things like speed and acceleration. There's a parameter that's used in design that's currently heavily lacking. It's something called perception reaction time. And so we set up a little bit of a deception experiment here today to try and measure that value.
That's good.
Hopefully you weren't too alarmed. It was all safe, hopefully. So I do have to ask for your consent to use this in our trial because we did have to do some deception.
No, that's fine.
Instead of finishing
I like that actually. That's the only thing that's actually made any sense on this study so far. How many people crashed through?
Nobody actually. We set it up in current design guidance.
Okay.
So the current design guidance is around this length, so it should be enough for them to stop.
Yeah.
But we still have seen videos where people are coming around and they have like a very obvious like reaction, a twitch.
Yeah.
Some people let out a couple little screams here and there. It's been interesting to see the range of reactions we've had.
Yeah.
Well, as you could see, what I was told about the study was not what they were actually examining. Rather, they were testing situational awareness, something I consider extremely important for cyclists. I was actually quite relieved I was paying attention and didn't crash through the barrier.
How's that? Nice little end to the course for you?
Yeah, it's great.
All right. Well, best of luck. Thanks again.
Cheers.
Have a good one.
With my participation complete, I decided to continue riding and I headed off towards Central Park. I figured I'd probably return back along Vanessa Avenue as I like to do. Normally, I'd turn left on North Grandview, but today I decided to continue north on Slocan to Adnak. That means having to climb a short but steep hill. Well, that turned out to be a good ride. I got in 63 kilometers and 536 meters of climbing, and I'm glad I participated in that study. Cycling is inherently dangerous, especially road cycling, and riders must be situationally aware at all times. It doesn't guarantee their safety, but it'll definitely decrease the likelihood of injury or worse. It is good to see the researchers actually focus on matters that I think are important.